Hello everyone, thanks for joining me today. I wanted to share with you today how it is I sewed my fabric baskets together that I designed with the BES4 software. The first basket that I made looks like this. Now you can see that the embroidery part does not show up as much on here because I used a very light colored thread against a very printed background. Now the next basket that I made looks like this, and you can see with this one that a solid background with a design does show up much more in detail. And the third basket I made was this one here. Again, you can see that the design shows up better on a solid print. And I did use a couple of different colors of thread just to change it up a little bit. So go ahead and get your supplies together and follow me along, and we will stitch our baskets together. So these are some of the supplies that you're going to need to make your fabric basket. You'll need your embroidery hoop and a stabilizer. I used a no-show mesh. You'll need a stabilizer or interfacing that is a medium weight, so that'll give your basket some firmness so it stands up. I also like an SF 101 Shape Flex interfacing, and I will iron that on to the back of my fabric, and that just helps give that fabric a little more firmness and helps to keep it from puckering when you're doing embroidery work. You'll also need a ruler, a rotary blade. I like some curved scissors to help with doing some trimming, some regular scissors. You'll need some embroidery thread and regular thread. And these are my fabric pieces already pre-cut and ready to go. And then I made this little ironing mat, any kind of ironing mat or ironing board, and a pressing cloth. And just, I have a small iron that I use, but you know, if you have a regular size iron, that'll work also. So get your supplies ready and we'll start sewing. What I want to do is to lay out all of your fabric pieces on top of that medium weight stabilizer interfacing that's going to give your basket some shape. And then you will go ahead and cut it, each section around. I went ahead and pinned my middle piece because when we start our project, we will start with the center piece, and you will have a basting stitch or a stitching placement guide stitched first. So we will be centering this. So we want to pin this in place here so that when we cut these out, we will know exactly where this needs to get placed on top of that stitching placement guide. So go ahead, lay these out and cut them out, and we'll go to the next step. Okay, let's go ahead and get started with our project. The first thing we're going to do is stitch out our placement stitch. So let's get started with that. This is going to create the box that is where we'll be putting the center panel for our long side panel of our project. Okay, now we're gonna put our piece in here, and you can see what is going to be the top of the basket is at the top here, and the bottom part of the basket is at the bottom here. We're gonna go ahead and remove those for now. What you're going to want to do is take this and center it from left to right, and also lift the side up and center this from the top to the bottom. Out there. Okay, once you get that where you like it, we're going to put the next stitch in place that will hold the fabric down. Okay, the next step will be to add our design embroidery. So what I'm going to do is make sure you remove that pin that was holding that in place so that you do not damage anything. And I'm going to change my thread color, and I'll be back with the next step. Okay, I've got my thread color changed, so now I'm ready to start my embroidery design. With this project, you can easily change out the embroidery design to whatever other design that you like. You may have a particular fabric that lends itself to a particular design. So it's really nice that you can just change out your embroidery design. I'm going to let this finish stitching, and then I need to make another color thread change. So we'll be back. Keep stitching out your design. So I changed to another thread color, and I have it stitching out. I added some little corner elements that I'm going to have stitch out next. So I'm going to go ahead and let this finish stitching out the corner elements, and then it's going to repeat this same motif over on the right side, and then I will show you how we're going to start piecing all of the pieces together to make the side panel of the basket. So finish doing your embroidery, and I'll be back in just a moment. Okay, we should all now have our embroidery design on our side panel completed. The next thing we'll be doing is adding our top band of fabric. But before we do that, what I want to do is show you that at the top here, we want to have our fabric come 1/4 inch from this edge here. So what I'm going to do is take a little ruler I have and mark me a 1/4 inch seam allowance so I'll know where to place that fabric. Okay, and the pen that I'm using is one that when I use an iron on it, it actually makes that ink disappear. Okay, so put this back in the hoop. Now, I suggest you put your fabric on top like this. So if you have a directional fabric, you want to make sure it's going the correct direction before you stitch it down. Once you have that in the proper direction, you're going to take this and flip it over and line that up on the edge here, and then we will stitch that down into place. So let's start that stitching. Now, if you want, you can trim this where I have this yellow piece here. And then what we're going to do is fold this back and we're going to press it into place. After you get it pressed into place, we'll do the next step. Okay, I have pressed this piece of fabric back. And now we're going to do a stitching line across there. Now, I made mine just a basic simple stitching line. If you wanted, you could make yours a decorative stitch of some type. Now we are ready to put our bottom piece of fabric in place. Again, where that first placement stitching line here is, we are going to want to place our fabric 1/4 inch below that. So you can visually place your fabric there or go ahead and mark it. I'm going to pull this out a little bit here. Lay my ruler down here. And give this a little marking. Okay. Now this is what will be the bottom part of your basket. Again, I would lay this in place first. If you have a directional fabric, you want to make sure you've got that going in the correct direction. And then fold this up. Line that up in place there. Make sure get my hoop put back in and locked. And then it's going to stitch this into place. Okay, I'm going to trim this little bit of excess yellow here, and then we will fold this fabric piece here back like this, and we're going to press that in place, and then it's going to do a little decorative stitch across the bottom here. So this would be the time to decide what color thread that you might want to put, and this would be a color change of thread. So I'll be right back. All right, I have gone ahead and pressed our fabric back in place. We're now ready to stitch out the next design element. Okay, we are now ready to go ahead and put our next placement stitch. But before we do, what I want you to do is to take this piece up here. We're going to fold this back. We're going to take some clips and clip it so that this doesn't get in the way of the stitching for the next section. Now we've got that clipped out of the way. Let's go ahead and put our next placement stitch. Okay, this here is going to be for one of the side panels, and it's going to lay this direction like that. So we can go ahead and move these out of the way. And you are going to want to do now is lift this up here, make sure your fabric is centered from right to left, and then lift it up this direction and make sure your fabric is centered top to bottom. And once you get that where you're happy with it, we'll do the next step. And it's gonna put, whoops, a box around for us. And now it's time to stitch our design. So we're going to do a thread change and then come back and stitch our design in place. So you can see I've changed my thread color and we are getting our design element stitched into place. A few more stitches here and I'll change my thread color again to finish out the design element. So just finish stitching out your design element and then we will be back to show you how to attach the top and bottom pieces to this section here. Okay, I've got my design element stitched and we're ready to put the top part of the basket. Again, I would lay my fabric down like this so that way if you have a directional design, you have it going the correct direction. And again, we want it to be 1/4 inch away from that stitching line. I've already gone ahead and put markings so I know where that 1/4 inch stitching placement needs to be. So we're going to turn our fabric over. I've got that lined up and let's go ahead and stitch that in place. And again, if you have any excess fabric here, you can trim it. And then we're going to go ahead and take this out and press that back. And then we'll be right back. Okay, I've got my fabric pressed back. So let's stitch it in place. And then we're ready to put the bottom part on. Again, lay it in place here. Make sure if it's a directional design, you've got to go in the correct direction. And then just flip it over. Line it up in place. And stitch. And you can see I had a little extra yellow fabric there on the left because I guess I didn't center it quite as well as I had hoped to. And that's one reason I cut my squares a little bit bigger than absolute necessary. So let's trim that and fold this back and press it. And we're ready to do the decorative stitch across the bottom. Okay, we've got our bottom piece pressed down in place. So let's go ahead and add in our decorative stitch border. Okay, at this point, we have got one side panel and one end panel all stitched out. So we're going to remove this part here from the hoop. Go ahead and add in your next piece of stabilizer. We're going to repeat this entire process one more time so that we will have the other side and the other end of our basket. Then we'll be ready to start stitching all the pieces together. So go ahead, if you need to, just rewind this part and follow along again. Or if you remember how it was done, just make your other side and end panels. Well, if you've gotten this far along, you should now have all of your panels stitched out. You're going to have 2 side panels and 2 end panels. So now what we're going to do is go ahead and cut them apart from the stabilizer that was holding everything together in the hoop. So let's move one of these out of the way. And we're going to make our first cut to separate these 2 pieces. So we're going to just place a ruler here, and I'm not going to be super accurate because we're going to actually be trimming more accurately in just a moment. So now I've got a side piece and an end piece separated. And what you're going to want to do now, so this is, remember, the top part of your basket, the middle section, and the bottom part of your basket. And what we're going to want to do, see if I can zoom this in, is that stitching line that we have here on the sides. You are going to trim 1/4 inch over on both sides there. So let's get this in position here. I'm going to take my ruler and 1/4 inch from that line is where this is lined up, and I'll trim that off. So you should be able to see the stitching line here. I'm going to line up my ruler so that that 1/4 inch lines up along there, and then trim that off. Okay, we've got one side trimmed 1/4 inch from the stitching line. You're going to trim the other side 1/4 inch from the stitching line. At the top section here, you're going to trim that from this edge right here 2 inches. Rotate this around, and from this edge right here for the bottom, you're going to trim that 3 1/2 inches. We're going to take our long panel here, going to do the same thing along this edge here, the side, 1/4 inch for our seam allowance. To trim the top at 2 inches. And then we're going to trim the bottom at 3 1/2 inches. 3 1/2. So we've now got one side panel and one end panel trimmed. You're going to go ahead and continue doing that on the other 2 pieces, and then we'll come back and start sewing these together. Now all 4 panels have been trimmed. We're going to lay them out in this order: an end panel, a side panel, an end panel, and a side panel. And we're going to sew these panels together, then these panels together, these panels together, and the end of this one and this one together. So we'll lay this one over. Use some pins or clips. You're going to want to make sure where those seams are here that you line them up very carefully so that when it's sewn together, it'll stitch out and look nice. So just go ahead and start clipping these. I'm going to take this piece, add it onto here, line that up, and clip. The next one, line that up. I'm going to take this next panel, just keep aligning them and clipping them. And then this last one, get that lined up. So now it'll look like the start of your basket here. So you're gonna do is sew a 1/4 inch seam along all of these that we've clipped together. I'm not going to have you watch me sew it. Go ahead and sew your pieces together. We'll come back for the next step. Okay, we should have all of our pieces sewn together. It'll be looking like this. And if you sew them carefully, your edges should line up nicely. So now what we're going to do is we're going to press our seams open. So on an ironing board or a pressing mat, We're gonna press these seams open here. I suggest using some kind of a cover, a pressing cloth, just in case whatever interfacing or stabilizer you've used doesn't melt at all onto the back of your iron. So let's press these open. And so you're going to go ahead and press all 4 seams all around your project. And then after you get those pressed open, we will come back and show you how to do the next step. Okay? Okay, you should have all of your side seams pressed open now. What we're going to do is turn your basket so that the bottom part of your basket is what's facing up towards you right now. And then you're going to have the side panels at the ends like this. We're going to take this seam here with the seam on the other side, and then you're going to want to line those 2 up and go ahead and clip them together. We're going to do the same thing on the other end. We're going to take this seam and line it up with the other seam here, and we're going to clip that together. And if you feel more comfortable keeping the center of the basket in alignment, clip that. The next step to do now is we're going to stitch across here, straight across, a 1/4 inch seam allowance. 1/4 inch seam allowance along this edge. Then we will come back for the next step. Okay, you should have your 1/4 inch seam allowance stitched, and then go ahead and press open this seam. Now here comes the trickier part, is making our box corners. One thing I found to help make that easier is if we lay this flat, going this direction like this, get yourself a ruler, and kind of where that bottom embroidery design is at, place your ruler in place. And I can see here my 0 mark and my 3.5 inch mark. The center of that is going to be at 1 3/4 inches. So I'm going to take up my pen, I'm going to put a mark in place right there. Now rotate your ruler, find the point down at the bottom here, line your ruler up at the point there and with the mark you just made, and draw a line. That's going to give us our center point here. Then when you lift this up, you'll see your side seam here. You're going to want to put your pin in the middle here and make sure it comes out on the other side on that line that we drew, and then make that pin come up on that line and through the center of the seam here. And if that lines up good, then these should be centered. Then what you're going to do next is you're going to stitch in the ditch. We're going to sew a seam right in the center of this seam here across. So we'll be sewing the side to the bottom by stitching right in that seam across here, and you're going to do that on both ends of your basket. So you'll have both of your ends stitched together, and then we'll go to the next step. Okay, I've got my corner pieces here sewn. I don't know if you can see or not. I've stitched in the ditch there. And if you turn your basket like the other way out. You can see you've made yourself a box corner. And you can tell if you've got it straight or not by how that seam runs across here. If it's not straight, you can take it apart, realign it, and restitch it. We've got that. We turn this around. You should be getting excited now. Look at, we're getting a basket together here. Okay, one thing we're gonna do though next is, we've got that all nice and done. We're gonna take a pair of scissors and we're gonna go ahead and trim off like that on both corners. Okay, I'm going to trim this. There we go. Now we can turn this right side out. You've got this far. You should be so proud of yourself. Okay, this is coming along looking beautiful. The next thing we're going to do is start to working on making our lining for our basket. So let me get the pieces for that out and we'll show you how we'll make the lining. Okay, we are ready now to start working on our lining. Now you have made your basket, and everybody's basket maybe has a different dimension. So we're gonna do a little math here to figure out the size to make the lining for your basket. So what I'm gonna do is take my basket, fold it in half across the top here. So this is how we're gonna calculate the width that we need. So take a tape measure, start at one end and measure across. And so we've got 10 3/4 inch. Now we need to do is add our 1/4 inch seam allowance to each side. So then that's going to give us 11 1/4. So we have 10 3/4, 1/4 inch to 11, 1/4 inch for the other side to 11 1/4 inch. So measure across, add in your seam allowance, and that will give you your width. Now for the height, fold your basket going this way. Going to measure from that center and measure to the top, and that measures 8 3/4, and we need to add in that seam allowance. It's going to be at the bottom, so 1/4 inch, so that's going to make it 9 inches. So whatever your basket measures plus your seam allowance is how tall you're going to make this. So I've got my measurements here, my measurements here. Now we've got to calculate how to make our corner cutout for our box. So open your basket up to the inside here. Go to where your seam allowance is, right here, and place your tape measure, and then measure across to where your basket ends at that seam. And mine happens to measure at 2 inches. So your basket box corner may be larger or smaller. But if you measure including the seam allowance across, I've got 2 inches. So that tells me then I am going to have a 2 inch by 2 inch cut out corner for the bottom of my basket. So you'll cut out 2 pieces of fabric. Now it's a matter of personal preference if you want to add your interfacing or not to your fabric here. I've already went ahead and ironed on because I want my lining to be maybe a little bit stiffer on this one, but I've made several of them without adding any interfacing. So it really doesn't make a whole lot of difference. It just depends on how stiff you want that lining. Now we're going to put these right sides together. And then you're going to go ahead and you're going to stitch from the top here to the bottom. You're going to stitch from the top here to the bottom. You're going to stitch across the bottom, but you need to leave about a 3-inch opening in the center. So I suggest take a pin and mark, and take another pin and go about 3 inches. So that way you know you will stitch from here to here and from here to here. And use your 1/4 inch seam allowance on those points right there. Sew those together and we will come back and do the next step. Okay, we should have our seams sewn along here. Go ahead and press open the seams. You see I've got my little opening here. Now what we're going to do is make our box corners. We're going to take the side seam and line it up with the bottom seam here. And go ahead and pin that. And on the other side, take your side seam, center and line that up with the bottom. And then you're going to pin that, and then we're going to sew across from here to here with our 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then we'll come back and we are almost finished. Okay, we've stitched across the edges here and completed our box corners. Now we're ready to take and start putting the basket pieces together. So let's take our basket main part and put it inside our lining so that we've got now our right sides together. Then we're going to do is line up the side centered here. And if you want to take an actual measure, that you can, and then clip that into place. And then on the other side, put that side seam in between, centered of those two seams, and clip that into place. And then just stretch this out to fit along that side. We're going to clip that into place. Stretch that along this edge here. We'll clip this into place. And now we're going to do is go ahead and sew completely around the top, our 1/4 inch seam allowance. And that will then sew the lining and the basket together at the top. Then after you've completed that, you'll take the inside of your basket part here, the main part, and pull it through the opening here until you get it completely pulled through, and then you'll be able to take and hand stitch this opening closed, and then that lining will get stuffed inside to your main basket. So let's go ahead and stitch the top part of this together, and I'll help show you along the next part. Okay, so I've got my basket main portion and lining sewn together. So now we're ready to turn this over and start pulling this center part here, the main part, through the opening. This is what I call the magic part. And you know, it can take you a little bit of time. Be gentle with it and just work it around and get that pulled through. Here it starts to come. Now finish pulling that lining around. Okay, this is where then I'm gonna, let's get a pin. We're going to, at this point here, hand sew this opening closed. Then after you hand sew that, this will get stuffed down inside. Then I want you to do next is you're going to press this all the way around at the top. Okay, so we're going to press that nice and neat around the top, and then you're going to take and top stitch around this edge here. And this sample here, you can see I did like 1/4 inch from the edge. And on this basket here, I did it a lot closer to the edge. So that's going to be a personal preference, how far from the edge you want to finish off your basket. Okay, so let's turn it around, close our opening, press and stitch, and then we will have our basket finished. Well, if you've got this far along, you should have a beautifully finished basket. As you can see, I've made a few, and with the different color choices that I've made, I end up with a very much different looking basket. So look at the video that I have done previously on how to make your stitching lines in your BES4 software program, and then utilize the video I just created here on assembling your basket together. If you have any questions, send an email to me or post a message on Facebook, and I'll see if I can help answer any questions you might have. And please share with everybody else what it is that you've created. I hope you have learned something today. I do not want to just give you the design on making the basket, because as the saying goes, if you give a man a fish, he eats for a day. If you teach a man to fish, he can eat for life. So I want you to actually create your basket template in your BES4 pattern, because that's only going to help you make yourself be more proficient using the program. Have a wonderful and blessed day. Thanks for joining me. Bye-bye now.